My name is Ian Angell, and I'm an emeritus professor of the London School of Economics. I am an agnostic, and I will explain what I mean by this later in the video. As an agnostic, I feel compelled to comment on the numerous YouTube debates concerning science versus the existence of God. I consider such debates to be futile. But let me start with a story. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland and the numerous atrocities between loyalist Protestants and Republican Catholics, a turbaned Sikh was stopped at a paramilitary checkpoint. He was asked, "Are you a Protestant or a Catholic?" To which he responded, "But I'm a Sikh." "Yes, but are you a Protestant Sikh or a Catholic Sikh?" I share that Sikh's confusion while watching these debates on the existence of God and the role of science in that context. I feel as if I'm being asked, are you an atheist agnostic or one who believes in God? All other alternative positions are excluded. In these debates, both sides misrepresent what I take to be agnosticism. The common impression given is that most agnostics are just atheists without the courage of their convictions. Apparently, we agnostics are just hedging our bets, a la Blaise Pascal. However, my particular brand of agnosticism has nothing to do with God, or science for that matter, rather with the very nature of knowledge itself. This form of thinking goes much further back than the 17th century and Pascal, to the ancient Greek skeptics, which I have fine-tuned with the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche, as can be seen in the many of his quotations I'll be using. In the YouTube debates, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Matt Dillahunty, and others line up against John Lennox, David Berlinski, William Lane Craig et al. These highly articulate debaters on both sides are vociferously supported by legions of angry, inarticulate, often ignorant, pious commentators, many of whom may be justifiably labelled internet trolls. What strikes me so forcibly is the hubris being displayed by all parties in their certainty over both the validity of their own position and the falsity of the others. I feel that none of the debating points being claimed actually register with me. No doubt many other agnostics share my concerns. We are outsiders, left feeling totally bemused. It's like watching arguments over how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. From my agnostic perspective, what I see is the confrontation of false opposites. No, it's worse than that. This is the clash of mutually incompatible axiomatic positions, with each position at its base being self-evident to the holder and beyond questioning. Both sides then insist that everyone must either be for or against. That having been said, they do have something in common. Both insist on the primacy of reason and the ability of human intelligence to be objective. Each side displays an unquestioning belief in the unimpeachable virtue of human logic and reasoning. And this is where my personal brand of agnosticism comes in. According to Nietzsche, reason is entangled in an evolutionary spiral. Human thought is genetically restricted and limited by the curriculum of an earlier mankind. He asked a very humbling question. What if intelligence is a mere epiphenomenon, a side effect of survival, which emerged from the elemental pattern making that all animals use in making their way in the world? What if thought was never our brain's original function? What if logic was intended as facilitation, as a means of expression and not as truth? Only later did it acquire the effect of truth. What if our intellect is a consequence of the conditions of existence, the emergent culmination of feedback in our species' successful quest for survival? Having taken on board this truly shocking insight, I now see that human reasoning does not tell us the truth about things. This agnostic stance has nothing at all to do with the existence or the non-existence of God. I agree with Socrates. All that I know is that I know nothing. Here Socrates rather cleverly is saying not that he knows nothing, rather he cannot be certain about anything. The fact is, most scientists would agree with this very sensible position. Indeed, many would say that this is the basis of the scientific method. However, this stance is soon forgotten when scientific atheists are confronted by a belief in God, which is most peculiar when many like Neil deGrasse Tyson, while denying the existence of God, seriously contemplate the entire universe as a computer simulation created by an alien supergenius, a la the Matrix film franchise. Substitute supergenius for God and we almost have a convergence of ideas. But back to Socrates and my interpretation of his aphorism as a denial of an objective reality. In other words, our knowledge of the world, our reason, our rationality is just a cognitive application. We interpret this so-called reality by systematizing observations using various schemes that humanity has developed over the millennia, like logic, language, mathematics, etc., and reason itself. However, the belief that we can fully describe reality with these schemes is a delusion. But it is a delusion from which there is no escape. Rational thought is an interpretation according to a scheme we cannot throw off. We think via delusions, which give us a convincing criterion of reality in order to misunderstand reality in a shrewd and advantageous manner. These delusions masquerade as reasons. Built on reasons, the whole edifice eminently reasonable. However, none of these reasons can bear too close a scrutiny, for then we would see them for what they are, delusions circumscribed by and dependent upon paradoxes. However, with layers piled upon layers, some delusions, the absurdities and the paradoxes, are so deeply entrenched that they are almost impossible to question. Consequently, the unassailable delusions are perceived as truth, becoming the basis of reasoning. Axioms driving personal thought, and uniquely different in each individual. Heidegger describes this as fabricated reason and its reasonableness. For me, agnosticism is all about recognizing such delusions, a term that is paradoxically used as a dirty word on both sides of the God versus science debates. You can see this in the book titles, the God delusion, the devil's delusion, the science delusion. But to an agnostic, delusion is not a pejorative, it is the basis of all human thought. At no time would I say that mine is the one and only form of agnosticism. And indeed, you may well ask, what are my qualifications for standing on this agnostic soapbox? None, other than my claim to being an agnostic. Nevertheless, I will present my personal take on what I see to be the absurdity of believing that human reasoning, linked to our senses, is capable of telling us the whole truth about the real world about us. What we think of as reality are schemas, cognitively constructed out of observed sense data. Even if there is a single reality behind our observation of the world, that world is still unknowable. But thankfully, it is variously interpretable via delusions. These delusions deliver the cognitive and physical structures that help us make our way through the fog of unknowing. My agnostic position is that there can be no single unblemished meaning to be extracted by observing the world. Instead, we are confronted by and must choose between a myriad of possible meanings, each cognitively imposed, each delivered by the interpretation of internally consistent but externally absurd delusions. Human cognition does not give us an explanation of our world, merely convincing descriptions. We call it explanation, but it is description which distinguishes us from earlier stages of knowledge and science. We describe better. We explain just as little as any who came before us. Propping up the denial of these delusions is a belief in reason and objectivity, a belief that some ultimate reality, some truth is within our grasp. This is science's first mistake, which is described more fully in the book I wrote with my good friend Dionysius Demetis. We propose that every cognitive choice, being based in delusions, is mired in absurdity and paradox. In that book, we develop the idea that there can be no development of knowledge without embracing fundamental paradoxes in human thought. In fact, these paradoxes underpin the very foundation of knowledge. Now, militant atheists avoid this issue. They deflect attention by claiming that science is closing in on the truth and that any absurdities and paradoxes will eventually be resolved by reason. On the other hand, militant theists will not move past the logic of their own belief systems, nor will they apply to themselves the same criticisms that they level at both atheists and other factions, other religions. To them, theirs is the objective and only righteous path to truth. From the perspective proposed in our book, we claim that objectivity is the presumed state where the observer has been abstracted away. In this objective world, everyone else must see the same world as me, one where there are no absurdities and paradoxes, a belief that is patently absurd. Hence, we give the following definition of human intelligence in our book. Intelligence is the ability to deny the absurdity in these delusions, and then, by reasoning, make sense with them. In other words, sense is constructed by reasoning, and that it does not exist objectively in the real world. By now, many of you will have noticed that by making this assertion about delusions, I too am resorting to distinctions, categorizations, delusions, and of course reason. Guilty as charged. This video and all my writings on the topic are my celebration of that paradox. Welcome to what this particular agnostic sees as the specific paradox behind all human thought. A logjam that can be resolved only by trusting in our delusions. However, in my defense, I do say that at least I am not making any claims about being objective. I am upfront about the Achilles heel of my own position. Humanity has not captured the keys to the kingdom of knowledge. Our only very naive people are capable of believing that the nature of man could be transformed into a purely logical. The world is logical because we made it logical. We made it logical with both our hardware and software. That hardware is our evolving genetic makeup and the stabilizing intellectual and physical artifacts we place in the world to reduce its apparent complexity. Our software is the data and social institutions transmitted across the generations with the same intention. We made the world logical in the eons of feedback that is human life on Earth. We are trapped in the mode of thinking, forced to build within a framework of replacement proxies that is knowledge, a cage set down before the dawn of intelligence. Just as certain human organs recall the stage of evolution of the fish, so there must be also in our brains grooves and convolutions that correspond to this cast of mind. But these grooves and convolutions are no longer the riverbed along which the stream of our sensibility runs. We have merely developed upon the fish's eye view of the world, and further back on an amoeba's view. Subsequently, we have cultivated more sophisticated and more convincing schemas at each stage in the feedback of human development, and this includes the present. A logic was formed that was sufficient for the effective interpretation of sense data. Today, we place our intelligence on top of what is always and already there. The amoeba, that simple organism in the primordial soup, has certainly come a long way within its self-cognition, self-reference, self-replication and self-preservation to deliver today's human being. Our delusions, our belief in internally created schemes of the world protect us Our brains cannot take in everything. There's just too much out there. We'd be swamped. Cutting down on complexity becomes a necessity. The structural coupling of an individual's observation and cognition linked to memory acts as a filter that thereby simplifies the input of sense data. That data is further reduced into categories, and by contriving patterns around those categories, we can reflect on the data, make decisions, and or communicate them with others. One example of this process is language itself, a fundamental descriptive schema upon which we build our delusions. In the beginning was the Word. However, to the agnostic, words do not clarify the situations. Words are where confusion begins, not where it ends. Words cover up confusion. They are the place where questioning stops so that communication and action can begin. By using a word over and over again, familiarity breeds contempt for the confusion, and we start to think that we understand its meaning. However, the childlike approach of repeatedly asking what a word actually means will lead to the carefully constructed cover being blown and the absurdity and confusion exposed. I can hear the more intellectually challenged among the theists now chanting, brain in a vat, as they do, at my descriptions. They say I am a refugee from the Matrix, but how can these people possibly deny that each of us is a brain in the vat being our skull? But it is a vat that can walk and talk and describe. That brain doesn't need to be a Matrix-like simulation triggered by aliens to make sense of the world. What it takes is the emergence that stems from the feedback, self-reference and self-consciousness that began way back in the primordial soup. The individual can benefit by arranging, simplifying, supposing and schematizing, thereby interpreting sense data as a map, a delusion, which is appropriate for dealing with the context in which he finds himself. As Nietzsche says, not to know but to schematize, to impose upon chaos as much regularity and form as our practical needs require. However, these descriptions produced by the brain, those reasons, these schemas, these maps are not the terrain. They can never be. This is because their representation of the world is mere replacement. Through repetition, through ritual acts, through habit and institutionalization, they suddenly appear to reflect the real world. Thus we, as humans, conflate the map for the terrain. We confuse our representation of these effects for the causes, but one should use cause and effect only as pure concepts, that is to say, as conventional fictions, for the purpose of designation and communication, not for explanation. By manipulating the structures, the categories on the map, namely the delusions, we assume that this will affect both the terrain and the artifacts we place in it in an equivalent way, and vice versa. Subsequently, consistencies, regularities within the delusion will carry back and forth over onto the terrain. That this seems to work and that empirically we sense objects in the world behaving exactly as expected, at least most of the time, is what convinces us that our reasoning has accessed reality. The agnostic, however, insists that what convinces us is not necessarily true. It is merely convincing. From this agnostic perspective, both science and religions are delusions. Not in any pejorative sense, but in the epistemic sense that all human interpretation of experience can only ever be delusion. And as such, both science and organized religions stand upon the shifting sands of delusion, of absurdity and paradox. What I see in the YouTube videos and debates on science versus the existence of God is each side pointing at the delusions and absurdities and paradoxes in the other, all the while denying those in their own. He who considers more deeply knows that, whatever his acts and judgments may be, he is always wrong. But is being forever wrong a problem? No. The falseness of a judgment to us is not necessarily an objection to a judgment. The question is to what extent it is life advancing, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps even species breeding. Perhaps falseness is too harsh a word here. Far better to use Nietzsche's own term, institutionalized fiction. A fiction possibly appropriate for our needs and thus appropriated by us, but a fiction nonetheless. And why useful? Because it overcomes rigid inertia, helps us make decisions, and spurs us on to action. So whether it is a belief in science or religion, in astrology or ghosts or little green men or fairies at the bottom of our garden, or agnosticism for that matter, provided the believer does not confront the absurdity and paradox in his delusions, then he can construct a useful personal reality and use it to make his way in the world more or less successfully. Thus, to the agnostic, these YouTube debates are mere posturing, a display of false certainty and a denial of fundamental paradoxes. And as for the truly committed believers and the non-believers are concerned, these debates change absolutely nothing. Both believers and non-believers see only the absurdities in the other side's position. They've had a lifetime of denying the absurdities in their own and have perfected the trick of brushing them aside, just like water off a duck's back. The agnostic position, however, is that the perspectives of both sides of the God versus science debates and in the agnostic position itself are, in a word, absurd. God may very well exist, but logical reasoning neither helps us find him or deny him. His messages to us will have to be interpreted via human delusions. This is all we have. That they are delusions does not deny God's existence. If he does exist, then the believer is open to receive his message. A non-believer gets nothing and so feels justified in denying his existence. Each side is convinced of the rightness of their position from personal experience and sees the other's stance as absurd. This situation was captured well in William Holman Hunt's famous allegorical painting of The Light of the World. Jesus is standing in front of an overgrown door, holding a lantern. That door has no handle and represents a mind closed to his words. It can only be opened from the inside. To quote Revelation 3:20, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me." This leads me to confront the absurdity of both factions as they use logic to reason about the existence of God. The validity of logical operation stands or falls on the validity of the operands, the categories formed in cognition. Believers exist in a self-referential world of categories that is different to that of the non-believer. They may even be using the same words. However, those meanings could not be more different. Atheists not only deny the existence of God, they also deny the existence of the door. Meanwhile, the believers will open the door even if it isn't there. Thus, in these delusions, there can be no meeting of minds. For the two sides can't agree on the existence of the door. What chance is there that they can agree on the existence of God? As for agnostics, they say there can be no truth in thought, that is, in delusions. There can only be conviction. Discussion on the topic merely reinforces personal biases and so futile. How should a tool, our intellect, be able to criticize itself when it only has itself for critique? How can we look around our own corner? How can those who are certain about their interpretation of the world open the door so they can sup and partake of an opponent's view of an alternative reality? Hence, to agnostics, it seems that God, if he exists, is an extra-natural joker. They see believers laughing all the way to their hope for heaven. Meanwhile, the atheists, so certain in the reasons for their denial, do not have the sense of humor to appreciate what is a cosmic joke. Thank you very much.